Well, here we are, friends. Here we are. A week into our first Black History Month since the murder of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police. Since white Christian nationalists attempted to overthrow our democracy. Since 462 Americans have died from COVID-19, during which the death rate for African Americans is almost 3 times what it is for whites. In a country that has so much strife and is so divided in so many ways, I agree with activist and media personality Austin Channing Brown. I am wholly uninterested in a conversation about unity that is not rooted in the unrelenting pursuit of racial justice. In the wake of the uprising in Minneapolis and all around the country, there has been an explosion of resources, of opportunities for conversation, and I must say, not a little guilt that has propelled progressive white folks to engage in the work of anti-racism. So I've been asked by some members of the congregation here at Scoof to spend a little time talking about decentering whiteness, sort of racial justice 102. It's not 101 because we've been involved in this work for a while. None of you are complete newbies to this work. And it is useful to return again to terms, to what we mean by some of these things, but to some of the actions that we might do. I want to share with you some of the work that we're doing at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis with our Moving Toward Equity team. And some of the terms that we use help tease out these words that may sound the same. They may sound as if they are interchangeable, but in fact, they're different. So I'm hopeful that I can give some context for these words that helps us be able to use them intentionally going forward. Our Moving Toward Equity team is working to develop and foster a culture of diversity, inclusion, and equity, which we define as diversity being comprised of the differences that make each of us unique, including gender, age, appearance, race, ethnic group, family or marital status, language, culture, sexual orientation, disability, religion, education, country of origin, political affiliation, socioeconomic status, and more. Wow. When we take all of that into consideration, in fact, our congregation here at Scoof, which may look like it's not very diverse at all, in fact, has some diversity. We were talking a little bit about age and what happens to our body. We have different physical abilities. We have some diversity in abilities. We have diversity in family and marital status, in sexual orientation, perhaps in our country of origin, in our level of education, in our socioeconomic status. We have more diversity than we might appear to have on the surface. Inclusion is how people experience being connected, engaged, and valued within a particular group. Inclusion begins with the core belief that everyone deserves dignity and respect. Dwayne, I'll use you as a bit of an example. You mentioned how much support you had gotten from the congregation. Imagine if one of our core values was that people who have had surgery to repair a broken bone didn't deserve the same inclusion and respect. You would not feel included. Inclusion is that everyone feels included no matter what their status is. And equity is closing the gaps so that the factors related to diversity do not predict one's success while improving outcomes for all. Let me read that one again. Closing the gaps, this is equity, closing the gaps so that factors related to diversity don't predict one's success while improving outcomes for all. If we make one person who is perhaps an outlier, we might think, in terms of diversity, if we include that person or people, that includes the outcomes for all of us because we are all included. Does that make sense? You with me on that? It was helpful for me to feel that breakdown. Here is another little conversation that's been posted around on the internet, and I found this useful also. Diversity asks, who is in the room? Equity responds, who's trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? This is a good place for me to pause and think of how it occurred for many women who were pioneers in moving into fields that had often been occupied only by men. Women might be in the room, but their voices weren't allowed to be heard. That was not yet equity. Inclusion asks, have everybody's ideas been heard? And justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken seriously because they aren't in the majority? If I have a minority opinion, is my idea taken seriously? Doesn't have to be agreed with, but am I taken seriously? That's justice. Diversity asks, how many more of whatever marginalized group we're talking about do we have this year than last year? Right? Have we increased our metric in the number of, let us say, people of color in the room? Equity responds, what conditions have we created to maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority here? This is really important when we look at, let's say, educational opportunities or housing. We know that housing is an area where there's a big difference in equity. What conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as the majority? Let's say white homeowners. What are the structures that prevent people of color from being able to be homeowners, right? That's the equity question. Okay, I don't want to go too far down into that conversation, and I can share those. I can share these resources with you, so you don't have to, sort of remember every single thing. When we talk about the beloved community, I think that is our journey toward the road to beloved community is the journey toward equity. Martin Luther King popularized the notion of beloved community, and he envisioned a society based on justice, equal opportunity, and the love of one's fellow human beings. It begins with a place where we all love each other, but it also is ever widening that circle of who belongs and always asking, who is not here, and how do we create conditions that make it equitable for everyone to be in the space of beloved community? It describes a society in which all are embraced and none are discriminated against. There's a San Francisco cartoonist named Brian Herrick, and he shared this little cartoon that I really liked. He said, I recently saw a tweet that went something like this. Reading about anti-racism doesn't make you anti-racist. And my defensive response was immediate. Is this putting down people for reading about anti-racism? And then he thought, wait a minute, what if I switched anti-racism with mountain climbing? Let's try it out. Reading about mountain climbing doesn't make you a mountain climber. All right. So you can read about something, but there is a whole series of actions and experiences that lead you to doing that thing. And that takes expert advice, trial and error, humility, setbacks, and regular practice. And I would add here, being within a community of practitioners, right? It's easier to go mountain climbing if you've got someone to show you the way and practice and learn with. He continues, not to mention that racism is nuanced with hidden layers and hidden levers, built-in secrets, unwritten rules, and over 400 years of social conditioning. So back to the original tweet, it was the word racism that set him off. He almost missed the truth of that tweet. Reading about anti-racism doesn't make you anti-racist, because of his white defensive response. As a white person in this culture, I need to question my defensive reactions constantly, or I'm just repeating history. And here's where I want to just own my part. I've been doing anti-racism work in a concerted way for quite a while. And my old stories come up when I don't expect them. They're still there. I have to unlearn and practice unlearning my responses of implicit bias, of hidden white supremacy culture that are in my brain. And I expect them to be there perhaps for the rest of my life. They come up, and I do make mistakes in my anti-racist work, for sure I do. Part of the process of doing the work is becoming okay with making the mistakes and knowing that those ideas are in my head and my work is to question them, right? I don't want to repeat history. I want to examine my defensive reactions without shame or blame. That's key, to examine them without shame or blame. So, Unitarian Universalist Association President, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, talked about beloved community at the 2017 Justice General Assembly. She said that it's a community that practices radically inclusive and compassionate, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural, multi-generational faith within, and acts powerfully in partnership and solidarity for justice and liberation beyond, right? So it's what we do inside our congregations and how we act in the world beyond. So here's the thing that I want to get down to. Why is this theologically important to us? We can do this work with political groups. We can do it with voting rights groups. We can do it with the NAACP. We can do it in all sorts of different ways. Why is it important for us theologically as Unitarian Universalists to engage this? There's a hunger in the center of the chest. There are ties between us, all human beings living on the earth. We are bound by the task before us. We are bound to each other by the task before us. Our project as Unitarian Universalist is connection, covenant, bringing about justice in the world for all beings, justice that leads to joy. According to Widening the Circle of Concern, I'm going to show you this book because it's an important one, Widening the Circle of Concern, the report of the Unitarian Universalist Association Commission on Institutional Change. Some Unitarian Universalists believe that work to promote equity, inclusion, and diversity is optional and tangential to our faith. Others believe that it is a form of spiritual practice among us, necessary to live out our faith. These are words of Mary Byron, who was a member of this Commission on Institutional Change, and she talks about her spiritual practice. I knew I couldn't do this transformational work unless I was willing to get uncomfortable, to start by acknowledging my role in our systems and the ways I participate in upholding our dominant white culture, conflict avoidance, assuming that good intentions are enough, denialism, denial, tokenism, white savior behavior, etc. Now, working on our principles, to live into our principles is a part of my spiritual practice. I practice humility and forgiveness for myself and my community as spiritual work. Every time I make a new discovery about my thinking that releases limiting thoughts and behavior, I feel more free. And that is spiritual work. Every time I make a new discovery about my thinking that releases limiting thoughts and behavior, I feel more free. And that is spiritual work. For me, it's important to remember that that justice does not take the place of our theology, that we have a theology of inclusion, and that we are all diminished when anyone is not included. I've said this to you before. It's not just about increasing the hues in our pews, that we have more people of color, though that would be wonderful. It's about being accountable partners and being able to be in relationship, having done our own work to eradicate those thoughts that come in. In our work to pass the 8th principle, we say that we member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association covenant to affirm and promote, journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. That's what we will affirm and promote when we pass the 8th principle. We're hopeful we'll do that at our annual meeting coming up in September. Arundhati Roy, an Indian author and racial justice activist, has said, the trouble is once you see it, white supremacy culture, white Christian nationalism, structures of oppression. The trouble is once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing, becomes as political an act as speaking out. There is no innocence. Either way, you are accountable. I think that too often Black History Month has exposed all of us to what's known as trauma porn, in which those of us in the majority culture get a voyeuristic look into the lives of Black people or Indigenous people or other people of color. We experience deep emotions and then we fail to act in any systemic way. What we have learned from this book, Widening the Circle of Concern, is that many people of color who have been involved in Unitarian Universalism don't want to tell their stories anymore of how they've gotten hurt. And now it is up to us to do the work. It is up to white people to do our work of dismantling white supremacy culture, decentering whiteness, and ever widening that circle. I'm going to share in the chat a little later when I finish this, the resource list that we have created at First Unitarian Society so that you can have a look at some of the things that we've vetted and think are good to see, read, experience, listen to. I think we've got a podcast section on there now. So if you're looking for resources, it's a really great spot. And I want to share this list from Allies. This is the UU group, Allies for Racial Equity. And you can become a member if you're interested of ARE, Allies for Racial Equity. I'll put that link in the chat also. They say for personal commitments, I commit to challenge my assumptions, speak honestly and kindly, prioritize relationship, choose curiosity over defensiveness. Wow, I love that one. When I feel myself getting defensive, I want to choose curiosity over defensiveness. Own and work on my own stuff. Offer and receive feedback as a gift. And monitor my needs and practice self-care. This is hard work. It can be exhausting, and it's good for us to really take care of ourselves, step away when we need to, and then back into it when we must.